She never imagined that agreeing to work at that isolated estate would change everything, that the man everyone whispered was severe and distant would see in her exactly what others called a weakness. Can you imagine spending years being rejected, hearing that you are too delicate, too fragile, too quiet to be loved? That every suitor who comes along looks at you and sees only inadequacy? But this story happened in the rural countryside in 1928, when a woman considered incapable of being a wife found the one man who saw her as a rare treasure. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Write down your city and state or country. I love knowing that these stories reach every corner of the world. And if you are enjoying this, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of overcoming odds and finding true love. Marion Rose was 24 years old when she finally accepted that she might never marry. Not for lack of beauty, because she had delicate features that caught the eye when someone actually stopped to look. Large, expressive brown eyes, dark hair that shone when the light hit it, fair skin that blushed easily. But Marion possessed something that in that time and place was considered a grave defect. She was too delicate, too shy. Her voice came out low and soft, even when she tried to speak up. Her hands, though skilled with needle and thread, were fine and slender. Her manner was gentle, almost fragile, like a flower that sways with the slightest breeze. The first rejection happened when Marion was 19. Jacob, the general store owner's son, had shown interest. He would come to buy spools of thread his mother didn't even need, just to have an excuse to talk. Marion, shy as ever, answered in monosyllables, looking at her own hands. She thought he liked her that way, until the day she overheard a conversation between Jacob and his father in the back lot. Marion had gone to deliver a finished dress for the young man's mother, and arrived without making a sound, as was her custom. Jacob's father's voice was clear and firm when he said the girl was pretty, yes, but too weak for farm life. That he needed a strong woman, one who could handle heavy work, who had a firm hand to run the house and help with the business. Marion's son is too delicate, the man explained. She'll break in the first gale. Marion left with her heart squeezed tight, but she still held on to hope. Maybe the next one would be different. Maybe someone would see value in her. But the second rejection came 6 months later with Charles, a cattle drover passing through the region. He had been enchanted by an embroidery Marion had made, flowers so delicate they looked real. They talked a few times, or rather he talked and she listened, answering in a voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear. Charles said he would return and wanted to know her better. Marion embroidered a special handkerchief to give him as a gift when he returned. But when Charles came back 3 months later, he brought a fiancée, a woman with a loud voice, loose laughter, and expansive manner. Marion saw from afar when he introduced the woman in the town square. She heard when someone asked why he hadn't chosen Marion, who was prettier. Charles's answer echoed, "Marion is beautiful, but I need a woman who can talk to customers, who has a strong personality," he said. "Marion is so quiet it seems like she might disappear." The third, fourth, and fifth rejections followed similar patterns. Men who were initially interested, but then gave up. The reasons varied in words, but were always the same in meaning. Too weak, too quiet, too delicate, not fit for a worker's wife. Can't handle the heavy routine of a ranch, doesn't have the strength to raise children in the country. Marion heard it all, hoarding every word like a wound that wouldn't heal. She began to shrink even more, to speak even less, to believe that there really was something deeply wrong with her, that her gentle and sensitive nature was a curse, not a blessing. She lived with her mother, Mrs. Evelyn, a widow who supported the house with seamstress work. Marion had 3 younger brothers, all men now, who worked on neighboring farms. The house was simple, 4 small rooms on the outskirts of the town of Cedar Creek. Marion helped her mother with the sewing, and in this she was exceptional. Her embroidery was the most delicate in the region, her hems the most perfect, her stitches so small and regular they seemed made by fairies. The wealthy women of the town ordered dresses and trousseaux specifically for Marion to embroider. She had hands of gold, they said, but hands of gold served no purpose in finding a husband when the world expected hands of iron. Marion had a small secret pleasure that no one knew about. When the day's sewing was done and her mother was already asleep, she would sit by the window of the small room she shared with her youngest brother, look at the stars, and sing. A voice low, almost a whisper, songs she invented. Sad and beautiful melodies about distant places, impossible loves, blooming gardens she would never see. Singing was the only moment Marion felt she could be exactly who she was without judgment. The stars didn't say she was too weak. The night didn't complain that her voice was too low. There, in the darkness, scented by the jasmine growing at the window, Marion was enough. It was on a Tuesday in August of 1928 that everything began to change, although Marion didn't know it yet. Mrs. Evelyn arrived home agitated, a rare thing for a woman always so serene. Marion was finishing a tablecloth embroidered with roses when her mother entered, speaking fast. "My daughter, there is an opportunity," said Mrs. Evelyn, with eyes shining with hope. "Rancher Raphael Montgomery is looking for a housekeeper for Willow Creek Manor. Good pay, room and board included. Mrs. Higgins, the cook over there, passed through town today looking for interested young women." Marion felt her stomach tighten. She knew Willow Creek Manor by name. It was the most prosperous property in the region, with land that stretched for miles, thoroughbred cattle, abundant crops. And she knew Raphael Montgomery by name and sight too, a widower for 5 years, a severe man who rarely came to town, and when he did, spoke to no one beyond what was strictly necessary. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair starting to grey at the temples, a distant look, the appearance of someone carrying an invisible weight. Marion was afraid just thinking about working for a man like that. "Mother, I'm not fit for that," whispered Marion with a trembling voice. "Mr. Montgomery must need someone strong, someone who knows how to command, who—" Mrs. Evelyn interrupted, holding her daughter's hands. "Marion, listen to what I'm going to tell you. Housekeeper isn't field labor. It's taking care of the main house, organizing, embroidering, arranging flowers, supervising the cleaning, everything you do well. And the pay would help a lot here at home. Your brothers are growing, they need clothes, food." Marion bit her lower lip, a gesture she had done since childhood when she was nervous. "But what if he doesn't want me? What if he says I'm too weak, like everyone else says?" Her mother sighed deeply. "My daughter, you are not weak. You are delicate, which is different. You have sensitivity, good taste, skilled hands. That is worth a lot, and a housekeeper is exactly the job for a person like that. Mrs. Higgins said they've already tried 3 different women, but none stayed. The house is abandoned without care since his wife passed away. He needs someone who brings life back to that place." Marion felt a tear burn in her eyes. "And if I fail? If he sends me away like the others did?" Mrs. Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hands with unusual firmness. "Then you come back home and stay with me. But what if it works, Marion? What if it's your chance to show that your delicacy isn't a weakness but a rare quality?" Marion agreed, more to not disappoint her mother than out of any conviction of her own. The next morning she put on her best dress, a dark blue one with a white collar she had embroidered herself with tiny flowers. She pinned her hair in a simple bun and went with Mrs. Evelyn to the square where Mrs. Higgins was talking to other women interested in the position. Marion recognized 2 of them. Joan, a robust girl with a loud laugh who worked at the general store. Teresa, a young widow of strong temperament known for taking no nonsense. Both seemed infinitely more suitable for the job than Marion. She almost gave up right there, almost turned and went back home. But Mrs. Higgins saw her and waved. The cook was a woman of about 50-odd years, plump body, expressive face marked by wrinkles of someone who smiled a lot, though at that moment her expression was serious. She looked at the three candidates with an evaluating gaze. Joan introduced herself with a firm voice, saying she was hard-working, unafraid of heavy lifting, that she could read and do sums. Teresa introduced herself, saying she had experience running a house, was a widow, so she had no husband to worry about, and needed the work. When it was Marian's turn, she could barely speak. Her name came out on a thread of voice. I know how to sew, embroider, cook a little, she said with trembling hands. I am careful, and I like to leave things beautiful. Mrs. Higgins studied Marian with an attention that made her blush intensely. The cook noticed the embroidery on the dress, noticed the delicate hands, noticed the withdrawn manner. Are you afraid of hard work? She asked directly. Marian swallowed hard and answered with honesty. I am afraid of not being strong enough, she confessed with a voice almost inaudible. But I try very hard in everything I do. Mrs. Higgins nodded slowly. I'll take the three of you for the rancher to decide. Willow Creek Manor is 10 miles from here. We leave now. The carriage is waiting. The journey was torture for Marian. Joan and Teresa chatted animatedly, speculating about the ranch, about the rancher, about the pay. Marian stayed silent, watching the landscape. It was a beautiful region, rolling hills covered in green pasture, well-kept white fences, fat cattle grazing peacefully. The closer they got to the estate, the more impressive the property became. The main gate was high and well made, the dirt path was clean and levelled, the internal fences were all painted and straight. Signs of prosperity and organisation everywhere. When the main house appeared at the top of a gentle hill, Marian held her breath. It was an imposing construction, 2 stories, white walls, red-tiled roof, a wide veranda with columns. But there was something sad about that beauty. The shutters were closed too tight for a sunny day. The front garden, which must have been magnificent, was abandoned. Rose bushes that had once been pruned grew wild, flower beds invaded by weeds, broken pots, a stone fountain in the center of the garden without water, covered in dry leaves. It was as if the house had stopped breathing years ago. Mrs. Higgins led them to the front porch and asked them to wait. She entered through the main door, and they heard muffled voices inside. Marian felt like fleeing. She looked at Joan and Teresa, both confident, and felt even more inadequate. I shouldn't be here, she thought. He will look at me and know immediately that I won't do, that I'm too weak, too quiet, too small to care for such a big house. She began to retreat subtly toward the porch steps, thinking of descending and starting the walk back to town. But at that moment the door opened and Raphael Montgomery appeared. Marian saw him up close for the first time, and her heart raced. He was a man of tall and strong presence, must have been around 6 feet. Broad shoulders of someone who works physically, hands large and calloused. He wore dark trousers, a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, leather suspenders, black hair already greying at the sides, cut short. A beard stubble of a few days. But what impressed Marian most were his eyes. Dark brown, deep, with an expression of exhaustion so intense it seemed to have aged his soul. They were the eyes of a person who had stopped expecting good things from life. Raphael descended the porch steps and stopped before the 3 women. Mrs. Higgins made the quick introductions. He greeted Joan with a nod, greeted Teresa the same way, and then his eyes landed on Marian. She lowered her gaze immediately, incapable of sustaining the weight of that attention. Raphael remained silent for a moment that seemed an eternity. Then he spoke, and his voice was deep, measured, careful. I will speak with each of you separately, he said. Joan, you may come in first. Joan went in confidently. Marian and Teresa stayed waiting on the porch, 15 minutes later, Joan came out, still confident but without the initial sparkle in her eyes. Then it was Teresa's turn, who went in determined and came out 20 minutes later with a thoughtful expression. Finally, Raphael appeared at the door and said Marian's name. She stood up on shaky legs and entered. The interior of the house confirmed the external impression. It was luxurious but abandoned. A wide living room with noble wood furniture covered by white sheets to protect from dust. Persian rugs rolled up against the wall. Crystal chandeliers dusty. Portraits on the walls darkened by lack of cleaning. Dried flowers in vases. Everything had a layer of neglect, of stopped time. Raphael led her to a side study, a smaller room with a large desk, bookshelves, a window looking out to the abandoned garden. He indicated a chair for Marian and sat behind the desk. "Please tell me about yourself," he asked with a neutral voice. Marian froze. Her mind went completely blank. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her throat was dry. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The silence stretched and she felt tears threaten. She was going to fail. She was going to be humiliated once more. She was going to prove she really was good for nothing. But then Raphael did something unexpected. He stood up, went to a sideboard and poured a glass of water. He brought it to Marian and said with a softer voice, "Breathe deep. There is no rush." Marian drank the water with trembling hands, and the cool liquid helped untie her tongue. My name is Marian Rose," she managed to say. "I am 24 years old. I live with my mother and brothers in Cedar Creek. I work with sewing and embroidery." Raphael nodded. "Mrs. Higgins told me you have skilled hands." Marian confirmed with a timid nod. Raphael continued, "Marian, I will be direct with you. I need someone to take care of this house. To organize, clean, make it a home again. The two women who came before you three were competent, but—" He paused, choosing words. "But they lacked delicacy. They cared for the house as if it were a barn, efficient but without life, without beauty." Marian raised her eyes in surprise and met his gaze fixed on her. Raphael continued, "My wife, Helen, passed away 5 years ago. She was a delicate, sensitive person. She knew how to transform any environment. A flower in a vase, an embroidered tablecloth, curtains opened just the right way, small details that made all the difference. Since she's been gone, this house has become just a building. I eat, sleep, work, but I don't live here. Do you understand the difference?" Marian understood. She understood so deeply that she felt a tear run down her face before realizing she was crying. "I do understand, sir," she whispered. "When the delicate person leaves, the place becomes just a place. It loses its soul." Raphael seemed surprised by the answer. He leaned slightly forward. "Exactly," he agreed, with a voice charged with contained emotion. "And I don't want just efficiency. I want this house to have a soul again. Do you think you can do that?" Marian wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed. "Sorry for crying, sir," she said with a choked voice. "I have always been too delicate, too sensitive. People say it is a defect, that I am weak." Raphael shook his head. "Delicacy is not weakness, Marian. It is a rare quality. The question is, do you want to try?" Marian looked at that man with tired eyes, at that big empty house, at that improbable opportunity. Her whole life had been a sequence of rejections, of people saying she wouldn't do, that she was inadequate. But here was someone asking if she wanted to try exactly because. She was delicate. It was an offer that seemed too good to be true. Or it was a trap of fate preparing a new disappointment. Marian took a deep breath, gathered all the courage she possessed, and answered, "I want to try, sir. I will try very hard. I will take good care of your house." Raphael nodded, and for the first time since Marian saw him, something that could be the beginning of a smile touched his lips. "Then it is decided. You start Monday. Mrs. Higgins will show you your quarters and explain the routine." The salary is $50 a month, with room, board, and Sundays off. If you need anything for your family, let me know. Marion could barely believe it. $50 was a fortune for someone like her. It was more than double what she managed with sewing. She would be able to help her mother, help her brothers, and more than money, it was a chance to prove her worth. "Thank you, sir," she said with a voice thick with emotion. "I promise you won't regret it." Raphael became serious again. "Marion, one last thing. This house carries a lot of sadness, many difficult memories. Perhaps you will feel the weight of that. If at any moment it is too much, tell me. I don't want you to stay out of obligation or fear." Marion nodded, without fully understanding what he meant. Later she would understand. Later she would discover that that house held not just sadness, but secrets that would change everything. Mrs. Higgins was waiting when Marion came out of the study. The cook had the expression of someone who already knew the result. She took Marion down a side hallway to the back of the main house, where the servants' quarters were. There were 3 small but comfortable rooms above the kitchen. "You will stay in this one," explained Mrs. Higgins, opening the door to the middle room. "It's the best one. It has a window to the orchard and gets the morning sun." The room was simple but welcoming. An iron bed with a thick mattress, a dark wood dresser, a chair, a small desk under the window, a trunk to store clothes, curtains of light fabric, slightly worn. Marion looked around and felt a wave of relief. It was a space all her own. The first time in her life she would have a room just for herself. "It is perfect," she said with sincerity. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins." The cook crossed her arms and studied Marion with attention. "I'll tell you something, girl," she said with a low voice. "I don't know why the boss chose you. You look like a little bird that will fall off the branch with any wind, but he chose you, so he saw something." Marion lowered her eyes. "I know I seem weak," she murmured, "but I will work hard. I will prove I am useful." Mrs. Higgins sighed. "It isn't about working hard, child. The other 2 who came before also worked hard, cleaned everything, left it shining. But the boss sent both away. Do you know why?" Marion shook her head. "Because they were too efficient and not human enough," explained the cook. "They treated the house like a machine, not a home. They moved the late Miss Helen's objects without respect, threw away things they thought useless but had sentimental value. One of them even suggested the boss take down all the portraits of his wife because it was morbid. He almost exploded." Marion felt a tightness in her chest. The entire house was a memorial to a dead woman. How to care for that without hurting. How to bring life without erasing memory. Mrs. Higgins continued. "I've worked here for 20 years. I saw when the boss brought his bride, saw the wedding, saw the happy years they had, and I saw when she fell ill. It was fast and cruel. A fever that wouldn't break, growing weakness. In 3 weeks she was dead. The boss never recovered. He closed almost the whole house, locked her room, stopped receiving visitors. He lives practically only in the study and his room." "And he wants me to change that?" asked Marion with a frightened voice. Mrs. Higgins shrugged. "I think he doesn't even know what he wants, child. I only know he is dying little by little in this ghost house. Maybe you can help, maybe not. I just warn you it won't be easy." Marion swallowed hard. Nothing in her life had been easy. Why would it be now? The rest of the day, Mrs. Higgins showed the entire house. The main parlor, the formal dining room with a table for 12 covered by a cloth, the library with hundreds of dusty books, the locked sewing room that had been Helen's, the guest room, the bathroom with a porcelain tub, and finally the second floor. There were 3 rooms there. One was Raphael's, door closed, which Mrs. Higgins didn't even try to open. Another was a guest room. And the third, door locked with a key, was Helen's room. "No one enters there," said Mrs. Higgins with a serious voice. "The boss keeps it locked since she died. Only he has the key. You will clean and organize the whole house. But that room is not to be touched. Marion looked at the dark wood door, ornamented with delicate carvings, and felt an inexplicable shiver. It was as if the sadness of the whole house was concentrated there, behind that locked door. "I understand," she whispered. "I won't touch it." When Marion returned home that afternoon, her mother received her anxiously. "Well?" she asked before Marion fully entered. She smiled. The first time in a long while she smiled for real. "He hired me, Mother. I start Monday." Mrs. Evelyn hugged her daughter tightly, and Marion felt her mother's tears wet her shoulder. "Thank God, my daughter. Thank God. I knew your delicacy would be valued one day." But as she prepared to sleep that night, Marion couldn't shake a strange sensation. Raphael had said the house carried sadness. Mrs. Higgins had told of the locked room, of the mourning that never ended, and Marion, lying in her narrow bed, looking at the stars through the window, wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. Would she be capable of bringing life to a dead house? Would she be strong enough to bear the weight of so much accumulated pain? And more importantly, what would happen when she, a woman too delicate and sensitive, encountered secrets hidden behind those locked doors? The night wind blew, making the curtains dance, and Marion closed her eyes. She had until Monday to gather courage. She had until Monday to prepare for a transformation she couldn't even imagine was coming, because Raphael Montgomery wasn't just looking for a housekeeper. He was looking for someone who understood the silent language of pain and beauty, and Marion, without knowing, was exactly that person. The question was, what would happen when two hearts too delicate, both marked by rejection and loss, began to recognize one another? Monday dawned cold for August, or Marion woke before the sun rose, packed her small suitcase with the few clothes she possessed, the sewing kit her mother had given her as a gift, and a sprig of dried rosemary she always carried for luck. Mrs. Evelyn prepared a hearty breakfast and hugged her daughter for a long time before she left. "Remember, my daughter, your delicacy is your greatest treasure, not your greatest weakness," whispered her mother with a choked voice. Marion nodded, guarding those words like a talisman against the doubts that still corroded her inside. The walk to Willow Creek Manor took 2 hours. Marion arrived with the sun already high, illuminating the green pastures and the cattle grazing peacefully. The main house seemed even more imposing under the morning light, but also sadder. The closed windows seemed like eyes that didn't want to see the world. The abandoned garden was an open wound in the beauty of the place. Marion breathed deep, adjusted the suitcase on her shoulder and climbed the porch steps. Before she knocked on the door, Mrs. Higgins had already seen her and opened it with an expression that mixed welcome and skepticism. "Arrived early. That's a good sign," said the cook. "Come, I'll show you where to put your things and then we'll have coffee. The boss already left to inspect the cattle. He returns only at the end of the afternoon." Marion followed Mrs. Higgins to her room, put away her few possessions in the dresser and trunk, and went down to the kitchen. It was a wide and warm environment, with a large wood stove, a massive wooden table in the center, shelves full of copper pans, windows looking out to the back vegetable garden. It smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee. They sat at the table, and Mrs. Higgins served coffee with milk, bread with butter, and fresh cheese. While they ate, the cook explained the routine. "You will take care of the main house. Cleaning, organization, linens, arrangements. I take care of the kitchen, the food, the garden. We have 2 men who work only on external cleaning and the yard, but they don't enter the house. The boss doesn't like many people circulating, so it's just us 2 in here." Marion listened attentively, chewing slowly. "And Mr. Montgomery, how is he day to day?" Mrs. Higgins sighed. "Silent. Wakes early, drinks coffee fast, spends the whole day working on the ranch, lunches sometimes skips, dines always, but eats alone in the study, doesn't talk much, doesn't receive visitors, lives like a ghost in his own house. Marian felt a tightness in her chest. What loneliness that must be, living in such a big house surrounded only by memories and silence. She finished her coffee and asked where she should start. Mrs. Higgins suggested the main parlour. "It's been closed for months. Open the windows, dust it, let the sun in, but be careful with personal objects, principally anything that belonged to Miss Helen. The boss is sensitive about that." Marian went up to the main parlour with a bucket, cleaning cloths, and the reverent care of someone entering a temple. She opened the heavy windows, and sunlight invaded the room, revealing layers of dust dancing in the air. She started slowly, taking the white cloths off the furniture. Revealed was a burgundy velvet sofa, leather armchairs, a carved wooden sideboard. Every piece of furniture was quality, chosen with taste. Marian cleaned every surface with delicacy, passing the cloth softly as if caressing. It wasn't just cleaning, it was a ritual of respect. On the sideboard were picture frames covered in dust. Marian cleaned each one with extra care. Photographs appeared. One showed a younger man, must be Raphael, around 30, beside a stunningly beautiful woman. She was tall and elegant, dark hair pinned in an elaborate style, light lace dress, a luminous smile that lit up the whole photo. Helen. Marian studied that face and felt a strange mix of admiration and inadequacy. How could she bring life to the house of a woman so radiant? How could her small gestures fill the void left by such a striking presence? But Marian pushed away the defeatist thoughts and continued cleaning. She polished every frame until it shone, arranged them on the sideboard with care, cleaned the crystal chandeliers, a time-consuming task that required patience to clean each pendant piece individually, swept, mopped the wide plank floor. When she finished, hours later, the room had started to breathe again. Light entered through the washed windows, the furniture gleamed, the air was fresh. But something was still missing. Soul was missing, as Raphael had said. Marian went down to the abandoned garden, walked among the wild rose bushes and found, hidden under uncontrolled branches, some roses that still bloomed. They were resilient flowers, deep red, that had survived abandonment. She gathered half a dozen with care not to damage them, returned to the kitchen, took a white porcelain vase she found in the cupboard, filled it with fresh water, and arranged the roses with attention. Each flower positioned to show its beauty, some higher, others lower, foliage distributed in balance. She took the arrangement to the parlour and placed it in the centre of the coffee table. The effect was immediate. The room that was merely clean was now alive. The red roses were a focal point that drew the eye, that gave purpose to the environment. Marian smiled, satisfied, a first small triumph. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the dining room, using the same technique. Careful cleaning, respect for objects, and in the end, a touch of life. She found in the pantry cupboard a linen tablecloth with delicate embroidery, probably made by Helen, washed it with care, ironed it, and spread it on the large table. The embroidery of blue flowers shone again. She picked a sprig of mint from the garden and placed it in a small glass vase in the center of the table. The fresh aroma perfumed the whole room. When Raphael arrived at the end of the afternoon, Marian was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Higgins prepare dinner. They heard heavy steps in the entrance, then silence. Marian dried her hands nervously, wondering if she had done right, if he would approve. Mrs. Higgins nudged her. "Go see if he wants to dine at the dining table today," she suggested. "Say the room is ready." Marian walked down the hallway with her heart beating fast and found Raphael standing in the doorway of the main parlour, looking inside. He was motionless, with an expression she couldn't decipher. Marian approached hesitantly. "Good evening, sir," she said in a low voice. "I cleaned the room today. I hope it turned out well." Raphael continued staring fixedly at the arrangement of roses on the coffee table. Silence stretched for so long that Marion began to think she had done something wrong. She was going to apologize when he finally spoke. "Helen used to do that," he said with a hoarse voice. "She would pick roses from the garden and leave them in the living room. Said a house without flowers was a house without life." Marion felt a lump in her throat. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I didn't know. I can take them away if you prefer." Raphael turned to her then, and Marion saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something more complex, a mix of pain and something that looked like relief. "Don't take them," he asked. "It is perfect, exactly as she did." He entered the room, walked slowly looking at every detail, ran his fingers along the clean sofa, looked at the arranged picture frames, observed the light entering through the open windows. "It's been 5 years since I entered here," he confessed without looking at Marion. "I ordered it closed after she died. I couldn't bear to see." Marion didn't know what to say, so she stayed in respectful silence. Raphael finally looked at her. "You have a delicate hand, Marion. You brought life without erasing memory. That is rare." The compliment warmed Marion inside in a way she didn't expect. It was recognition she had never received, validation of her nature instead of criticism. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "I will take good care of the house, I promise." Raphael nodded. "Mrs. Higgins asked if you want to dine in the dining room today," Marion added, gathering courage. "The table is ready." Raphael hesitated, conflict visible in his expression. Then, to Marion's surprise, he agreed. "All right. It's been a long time since I dined at the table like civilized people. I will wash up and come down in 20 minutes. Marion ran to the kitchen and relayed the news to Mrs. Higgins, who raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Good Lord," exclaimed the cook. "I don't know what you did, girl, but in one day you already achieved what no one achieved in 5 years. You pulled the man out of hiding. Dinner was a silent but significant event." Raphael sat at the head of the large table, Marion and Mrs. Higgins offered to eat in the kitchen, but he insisted they sit with him. "Makes no sense to use a table for 12 for just one," he argued. They ate stewed chicken with rice and vegetables from the garden, accompanied by fresh bread. Raphael ate slowly, occasionally looking at the sprig of mint in the center of the table, at the embroidery of the cloth, at the candles Marion had lit in the candelabras. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people starting to get used to each other's presence. When he finished, Raphael thanked them for the food, looked at Marion and said, "Keep doing what you are doing. The house already feels different." Then he went up to his quarters. Mrs. Higgins cleared the table, shaking her head in admiration. 5 years, she repeated. 5 years, locked in himself, and you in one day open a crack. Marion didn't dare feel too much pride. It was only the first day. There was still the whole house ahead, still the locked room upstairs, still mysteries she didn't even imagine existed. The following days established a routine. Marion woke early, had breakfast with Mrs. Higgins, and started working in a different part of the house. She cleaned the library, organized the books by subject, opened windows to air out the smell of mold. She found volumes of poetry that had markings in the margins, notes in a delicate feminine handwriting. She read some marked verses and understood a little more of Helen. She was romantic, a dreamer, a lover of beauty. Marion felt as if she were getting to know a ghost through the traces left behind. She cleaned the large bathroom, scrubbed the porcelain tub until it shone, changed mouldy curtains for others she found in the linen closet, washed towels that had been stored for years, ironed them and folded them with care. Each task was executed with attention to detail, with respect, with the delicacy that was her trademark. And every day, at the end of the afternoon, Raphael found some small new detail. fresh flowers in a vase, a curtain opened, letting light in, cushions arranged on the sofa, a book of poetry left open to a specific page on the library table. It was on Thursday, Marian's 4th day at the ranch, that the first moment of real connection happened between her and Raphael. Marian was in the library organizing the last shelves when Raphael entered unexpectedly. She was standing on the small ladder, reaching for books on the high shelves, humming softly without realizing. It was a sad and pretty melody, one of the songs she invented in nights of solitude. Raphael stopped at the door and stood listening. Marian only realized she wasn't alone when she turned with a pile of books in her arms and almost fell off the ladder in fright. Raphael moved fast, crossed the room in 3 long strides, and held the ladder, stabilizing it. Marian climbed down with her face flaming with shame. "Sorry, sir," she said, breathless. "I didn't hear you enter." Raphael was still holding the ladder, close enough for Marian to smell him, a mix of leather, earth, and something woody. "You sing," he observed. Marian lowered her eyes. "Only when I am distracted. It is a silly habit." Raphael shook his head. "It isn't silly. Helen also sang while she worked, said music made tasks lighter." Marian raised her eyes and met his gaze. For the first time she saw something beyond sadness there. There was curiosity, genuine interest. "Mrs. Helen must have been a special person," said Marian with sincerity. "Everything I find of hers in this house shows someone who loved beauty and delicacy." Raphael agreed, with his expression softening. She was like spring in human form. Everything she touched gained life. He paused, seeming surprised at himself for speaking so much. "You remind me of her in that," he admitted. "You have the same delicate way of transforming places." Marian's heart accelerated with the compliment, but also with the weight of it. She didn't want to be a substitute for a dead woman. She didn't want to be compared. She wanted to be seen as herself. "I don't want to take anyone's place," she said softly. "I only want to help the house breathe again." Raphael studied her for a long moment. "You aren't taking anyone's place, Marian," he said with a gentle voice. "You are creating your own space, and that is good. It is what this house needs. If you are liking this story of love and overcoming odds, leave your like so the channel can continue bringing more emotional stories like this one." They stood there for a moment, suspended in time, looking at each other, something tenuous and fragile beginning to form between them. Then Raphael cleared his throat, took a step back. "I came to get a ledger," he explained. "Sorry to have interrupted." Marian shook her head. "You didn't interrupt, sir. Take what you need." Raphael took the book he was looking for and left. But before crossing the door, he turned. "Marian, you can call me just Raphael. Sir makes me feel old." She smiled timidly. "All right, Mr. Raphael." He almost smiled too. "Just Raphael," he corrected. She nodded, and he left. Marian stood still in the library with her heart beating out of rhythm. What had just happened? Was it just a boss being kind to a maid? Or was there something more? She pushed the thoughts away. It was dangerous to feel anything. Raphael was a widower still in mourning, a wealthy man and landowner. She was just a housekeeper, a poor woman without a dowry, too delicate to aspire to anything beyond honest work. But when she lay down that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the tone of voice when he said she was creating her own space. It was the next day, Friday of the first week, that Marian discovered something that would change everything. She was cleaning the second-floor hallway, carefully avoiding the locked door of Helen's room, when she noticed something strange. The wood floor in front of the door had dark stains that didn't come out with normal cleaning. They looked old, the kind that penetrates deep into the wood. Marian scrubbed harder, using stronger soap, but the stains remained. She was so concentrated she didn't hear footsteps on the stairs. "What are you doing?" The voice behind her made her jump in fright. Marion turned and saw a man she didn't know. He was tall, well-dressed in expensive clothes, dark hair combed with brilliantine, mustache trimmed with precision, and an expression of arrogance on his face. He had some resemblance to Raphael in features, but where Raphael had depth and weight, this man had superficiality and calculation in his eyes. "Sorry, sir," said Marion, standing up quickly. "I am Marion, the new housekeeper." "I'm cleaning." The man studied her up and down, with a look that made her feel exposed and uncomfortable. "Housekeeper," he repeated with a tone that wasn't quite disdain, but came close. "Another one. And how long will this one last?" Marion didn't know how to answer. The man continued without waiting. "I am Philip Montgomery, Raphael's cousin. I manage part of the business." He paused, looking at her with a calculating expression. "Interesting," he said. "Raphael finally decided to hire someone, and he chose a delicate little thing. You look like you'll break with a strong wind." Marion felt a familiar wave of anger, the same she felt every time someone belittled her for her appearance. But she swallowed the anger and answered with politeness. "Delicacy is not fragility, sir." Philip gave a short laugh. "Let's see how long you last here, missy. This house has a way of eating people, especially the delicate ones." He passed by her without further explanation and went down the stairs. Marion stood, trembling, not exactly from fear, but from something close to alert. There was a threat in his words, something beneath the surface she didn't fully comprehend. That night, during dinner, Marion mentioned casually that she had met Philip. Raphael, who was eating quietly, froze with his fork in the air. "He came here?" he asked with a tense voice. Marion nodded. "Said he manages part of the business." Raphael placed the fork on the plate with controlled care. "Philip manages the cattle transport and part of the sales," he explained. "But he does not have authorization to enter the main house whenever he wants. He is a cousin, not a brother." "What did he want?" Marion sensed sudden tension in the room. "I don't know, Raphael. I met him in the second-floor hallway. He saw me cleaning and left." Raphael frowned. "Second floor? Near which room?" Marion hesitated. "Near the room that stays locked, Mrs. Helen's room." Raphael's face darkened. "If he returns, tell me immediately," he said with a hard voice. "Philip has a habit of appearing without warning and poking around where he shouldn't, especially in that room." Marion was going to ask more when Mrs. Higgins intervened, changing the subject. The cook had a skill for sensing when tension was rising too high, but Marion stored the information. Philip had an interest in the locked room. Why? What was there that mattered? And why did Raphael seem so protective, so territorial about that space? The following days brought more subtle changes to the ranch. Marion finished cleaning the entire main house, except, of course, Helen's room. Every room was aired out, clean, decorated with small personal touches, fresh flowers, open curtains, objects arranged with taste. The transformation was visible. Even the hands who worked in the pastures commented. "The main house has got its soul back," said one of the older cowboys to Mrs. Higgins, and the cook relayed the praise to Marion. More significant was Raphael's transformation. He began to spend more time in the house instead of hiding in work until late. He dined at the dining table every night now, sometimes even talked a little, telling about the cattle, about the crops, about plans for the ranch. Marion listened more than she spoke, but when she spoke, he paid genuine attention. Asked about her family, about the sewing she did, about the books she had noticed in the library. It was in one of these dinner conversations, already in Marion's second week at the ranch, that a second moment of real connection happened. Raphael mentioned he was having difficulty with commercial correspondence, that his handwriting was terrible, and he couldn't draft the formal letters that cattle buyers expected. Marion, without thinking much, offered to help. "I know how to write well," she said timidly. "I could copy the letters out for you." Raphael looked at her with surprise. "You know how to write," Marion confirmed. "My mother insisted I learn, said it was important even for a woman. I read and write well." Raphael studied her for a moment. "That would be very useful," he admitted. "I have a pile of overdue correspondence. If you could copy them out in your spare time, I would pay extra." Marion shook her head. "No need to pay extra." "It's part of helping," Raphael insisted. "No, Marion, it is additional work. I will pay. It is decided." She saw it was useless to argue and agreed. From then on, Marion began spending part of the afternoons in the study, seated at the smaller desk beside the window, copying out the letters Raphael wrote in scrawled handwriting. It was work she loved. The words flowed under her pen, delicate and legible handwriting transforming his scribbles into proper professional correspondence. Raphael frequently worked at his own desk while she wrote, and the room was filled with the sound of the scratch of pens on paper, the tick-tock of the wall clock, the song of birds entering through the open window. Sometimes Raphael paused to watch her write, admiring the delicacy of her handwriting, the concentration on her face. Sometimes their eyes met accidentally, and both looked away fast, but not fast enough to hide something that was beginning to grow. It was a subtle attraction, delicate like everything about Marion, but it was there. Indirect flirtation of glances that lasted a second too long, of proximity when he leaned in to check a letter and stood too close, of thank yous that came in a softer tone than necessary. Mrs. Higgins noticed. Of course she noticed. A cook who worked there for 20 years knew how to read signs. She pulled Marion aside one day and asked directly, "Are you getting attached to the boss girl?" Marion blushed violently. "No, Mrs. Higgins, I just work here." The cook gave a skeptical look. "I know how it is. He is coming back to life and you are the reason. Natural that feelings appear. But be careful, Marion. He is a grieving widower. You are help. The world doesn't look kindly on this type of thing." Marion knew Mrs. Higgins was right. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground. But how to control a heart? How to stop a feeling that grew every time Raphael smiled for real, for the first time since she met him, every time he thanked her for some small detail she had tended to, every time they looked at each other and the air became charged with something unspoken? She tried to discipline herself, keep distance, remember her place, but it was getting harder. It was in the third week, on a Saturday afternoon, that everything began to complicate. Marion was in the garden trying to tame the wild rose bushes. She had asked Raphael for permission, and he had agreed, even suggested calling one of the men to help with heavy work. But Marion preferred to start alone, pruning thinner branches, planning how to restore the beauty the garden once had. She was so concentrated she didn't hear horses arriving. Philip appeared with 2 more men, all well-dressed, clearly friends of his social class. They dismounted in front of the house, and Philip saw Marion in the garden. "Look at that," he called in a loud voice to his friends. "The little housekeeper turned gardener. Don't you have other hidden talents, missy?" The friends laughed with unpleasant insinuation. Marion felt her face burn, but continued working, ignoring them. Philip approached the low fence that separated the garden from the driveway. "Is Raphael in?" he asked with a tone that wasn't quite a question. "He is in the pastures," answered Marion without looking at him. Philip laughed. "Always working. The man will die of so much work if he isn't careful, or of loneliness, or both." He paused, looking at Marion with a calculating expression. "Unless he found company right here at home. Is that it, missy? Are you keeping my cousin company?" Marion put down the pruning shears and faced Philip. "Respect, Mr. Philip," she said with a trembling but firm voice. "I am an employee here, not your source of amusement." Philip raised his hands in a fake gesture of peace. Calm down, just observing. It is interesting how Raphael hires a delicate and pretty girl and suddenly spends more time at home. Makes one think, doesn't it?" Marion didn't answer. She turned and went back to the house, ignoring the laughter of the three men. Inside, she was shaking with anger and humiliation. Mrs. Higgins saw her state and took her to the kitchen, made calming tea. "What happened?" she asked. Marion told about Philip and his comments. The cook shook her head with a somber expression. "Philip has been a problem for years," she explained. "When the boss married Miss Helen, Philip hoped they wouldn't have children, so the inheritance would eventually pass to him, being the closest cousin. When Miss Helen died without leaving heirs, Philip got even more interested. He is always prowling, always suggesting he help more with business, that he live in the main house. The boss keeps him at a distance, but Philip is persistent." "And what do I have to do with that?" asked Marion, confused. Mrs. Higgins sighed. "If Raphael gets attached to you, if God willing he even marries again, Philip loses completely the chances of inheriting. That's why he has his eye on you. He is measuring how much of a threat you represent. And by the looks of it, he sees you represent quite a lot." Marion felt a chill down her spine. She hadn't thought of the larger implications. She had thought only of doing her job, of perhaps nourishing a secret hope that Raphael might see her as more than a maid. But she hadn't considered that there could be enemies in that possibility, that there could be someone working actively against any chance of happiness for Raphael, and worse, working against her. When Raphael returned at dusk, Philip and his friends had already gone. Marion thought about telling him of the unpleasant comments, but decided not to say anything. She didn't want to seem like she was complaining that she couldn't handle difficult situations. She already had a reputation for being too delicate. She wasn't going to confirm it by lodging a complaint at the first serious provocation. But Raphael noticed something was wrong. During dinner, he noticed Marion was too quiet, that she pushed food around without eating much, that she avoided looking directly at him. "Was Philip here?" he asked suddenly. Marion raised her eyes in surprise. "How did you know?" Raphael gave a half-smile without humor. "I recognize the signs. When Philip passes, he leaves a trail of discomfort." "What did he say?" Marion hesitated, but decided to tell the truth partially. "He made inappropriate comments. Suggested things that weren't true." Raphael clenched his jaw. "I will speak with him," he said with a hard voice. "He has no right to bother you." "Please no," asked Marion quickly. "It will only make things worse. He was only trying to provoke me." Raphael studied her. "Marion, you don't need to tolerate disrespect, no matter who it is." "I can handle it," she insisted. "Please." The last request came out almost as a plea. Raphael clearly didn't like it, but agreed reluctantly. "All right, but if he crosses the line again, tell me. Promise?" Marion promised. But something had changed. There was new tension in the air, awareness that outside forces were watching, judging, planning. That night, Marion slept poorly. She dreamed of locked doors, of stains on the floor that wouldn't come out, of men laughing at her. She woke before dawn with a sensation of unease, dressed and went down to the kitchen, thinking of starting the day early. But when she passed the hallway leading to the study, she saw a light on inside. It was strange. Raphael never worked so early. Marion approached slowly and looked through the half-open door. Raphael was seated at the desk with his head in his hands, a posture of complete exhaustion. On the table in front of him was a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a glass. He didn't seem drunk, just tired in a way that went beyond the physical. It was weariness of the soul. Marion stood paralyzed, not knowing if she should enter, if she should retreat silently, if she should offer help. It was when Raphael raised his head and saw her. For a moment, they just looked at each other through the half-light of dawn. Then Raphael spoke with a hoarse voice. "Sorry, I didn't want anyone to see me like this." Marion entered the study. "No need to apologize," she said softly. "Everyone has difficult nights." Raphael gave a bitter laugh. I have difficult nights for 5 years. You are only seeing one of them. Marion approached slowly, as she would approach a wounded animal. Can I do something? Tea? Coffee? He shook his head. Just sit with me a little, if it isn't a bother. Marion pulled the chair where she usually sat to write letters and sat down. Silence settled in, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of companionship, of presence that comforts without demanding words. After an indefinite time, Raphael began to speak. Today makes exactly 5 years, he said. 5 years since Helen died. I wake up every year on this day, and it is as if it were yesterday. The pain comes back whole, fresh, impossible to breathe around it. Marion felt tears burn her eyes. I am so sorry, she whispered. Raphael continued, as if he had opened a floodgate he couldn't close anymore. She died in the room upstairs. A fever the doctors couldn't cure. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of suffering while I watched helpless. In the end, she didn't even recognize me anymore, just delirious, calling for a mother who had already died years ago. When she finally went, I felt relief she was at peace. And then I hated myself for feeling relief. Marion couldn't hold back the tears. They ran free down her face as she listened. You shouldn't hate yourself for that, she said with a choked voice. True love wants the loved one to stop suffering, even if it means losing them. You felt relief because you loved her, not despite loving her. Raphael looked at her then, really looked, and Marion saw total vulnerability in his eyes. How are you so wise, being so young? He asked. Marion gave a half-smile, wet with tears. Pain teaches, she answered. Maybe not the same pain as yours, but pain teaches. Raphael extended his hand across the table, and after a hesitation, Marion placed her hand in his. His fingers were large, calloused, warm. They enveloped her small and cold hand with gentleness. Thank you for being here, he said. Thank you for not judging me, for not thinking I am weak. Marion squeezed his hand. Pain isn't weakness, she said, echoing the words he himself had said about delicacy. It is proof you loved deeply, and that is strength. They stayed there, hands joined over the antique desk, dawn light starting to illuminate the study, something deep and true forming between two wounded hearts, beginning to recognize mutual healing. It was Mrs. Higgins who found them like that half an hour later when she came to prepare coffee. She stopped at the study door, saw the interlaced hands, saw the dried tears on both faces, and understood. Something had changed irreversibly. She withdrew silently, but she knew complications were just beginning, because love born between a wealthy widower and a poor housekeeper was never a simple story. Especially when there were ambitious cousins lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to destroy any chance of happiness, and especially when there was a locked door upstairs guarding secrets no one had yet discovered. Secrets that, when revealed, would test fragile and new love in ways none of them could predict. The following weeks brought changes neither Marion nor Raphael expected. What started as a relationship of boss and employee had transformed into something deeper, more complex. They didn't speak openly about what was growing between them, but it was there, in every prolonged look, in every conversation that extended beyond necessary, in every excuse they found to be in the same room. Marion woke up thinking of him. Chose dresses with more care, pinned her hair in a way she knew he found pretty because she had seen the way he looked when she wore a certain style. Raphael, in turn, began to spend even more time in the main house, invented reasons to be in the study when he knew Marion would come to copy letters, complimented details she added to the house, not just with polite words, but with a tone of voice that carried genuine affection. Mrs. Higgins observed everything with a mix of joy and worry. She wanted to see the boss happy again, wanted Marion to find true love, but she knew the world, knew how society worked, and knew trouble would come. One day, while they prepared lunch together, the cook decided to speak. "Marion, my child, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you falling in love with the boss?" Marion stopped peeling potatoes, stood motionless for a moment too long. She didn't have the courage to lie to Mrs. Higgins, but also feared admitting the truth out loud. "I didn't want to," she whispered finally. "I know I shouldn't. I know I am just a maid, that he is a widower who still loves his wife, that it will never work. But when I am near him, I feel like I finally found someone who sees me for real, who doesn't think I am weak or inadequate, who values exactly what I am." Tears began to fall. How can I not fall in love with someone like that? Mrs. Higgins hugged the girl, squeezing her with maternal strength. "I know, dear, I know, and he is falling for you too. Any blind man can see." Marion pulled away, wiping tears. "And that only makes it all worse. Because when he realizes what he is doing, when society starts to talk, when people like Philip start to pressure, he will retreat. He will realize I don't suit him, that I am too delicate, too poor, too insignificant. And I will lose, not just him, but this place I learned to love, this house I cared for, as if it were mine." Mrs. Higgins held Marion's face between her hands. "Listen to what I'm going to tell you. You are not insignificant. And if Raphael is the man I think he is, he won't let the world decide for him. But you need to be prepared to fight, Marion, because it won't be easy." As if to prove Mrs. Higgins' words, Philip intensified his attacks. He began appearing at the ranch more frequently, always with excuses related to business, but clearly just to observe, to pressure, to sow doubts. One day he arrived when Raphael and Marion were in the study working on correspondence. The door was open, everything appropriate, but Philip stopped at the entrance with a malicious smile. "What a domestic scene," he commented. "The rancher and his private secretary. Or is it housekeeper? I get confused about what function she really performs here." Raphael stood up abruptly with a furious expression. "Philip, you have crossed the line. Marion works here honestly, and I will not tolerate your insinuations." Philip entered the study uninvited. "Cousin, I only worry about you, about your reputation. People in town are already talking. They say the pretty housekeeper has the rancher bewitched, that he doesn't think clearly anymore, that he is dishonoring Helen's memory by attaching himself to the first woman who appears after 5 years. Marion felt as if she had been slapped. Philip's words echoed her own deepest fears. She stood up too, gathering the papers with trembling hands. "Excuse me," she murmured, "I will let you talk." But Raphael held her arm gently when she passed. "No," he said with a firm voice, "you stay. It is Philip who is leaving." He faced his cousin. "You have no right to come to my house making accusations, no right to speak of Helen as if you knew her, and definitely no right to offend Marion." Philip laughed humorlessly. "Defending her like that only proves my point, Raphael. You are blind. This woman arrived here less than 2 months ago and already has you eating out of her hand. Don't you see she knows exactly what she is doing? Showing herself delicate and vulnerable so that you, the lonely widower, feel necessary? It is classic manipulation." Raphael took a step toward Philip with a threatening posture. "Get out of my house now, and don't come back unless I call. You are fired from the Transport Administration. I will hire someone else." Philip's face turned red with anger. "You are making a mistake, cousin, a mistake you will regret. When this little woman leaves you or disappoints you, don't come crying. And when you need real family, you will discover you alienated the only people who care about you." He left, slamming the door with force that made the pictures on the wall shake. Marion was trembling too. "Mr. Raphael," she whispered, "maybe he is right. Maybe I should leave before I cause more trouble." Raphael turned to her with an intense expression Marion had never seen. "No," he said with a hoarse voice. "Don't go. Please, Marion, I know this is complicated. I know there are differences between us that the world will point out. I know there are people like Philip who will try to separate us. But I cannot let you go. I cannot pretend I don't feel what I feel." He approached her. So close Marion could see the small lines around his eyes, could feel his heat. "You brought me back to life, Marion. In the last 2 months, I felt more, lived more, than in the last 5 years. Do you think I am going to let that escape because of gossip or an ambitious cousin?" Marion felt her heart beating so hard she could barely breathe. "And Mrs. Helen," she whispered, "you still love her. I could never compete with her memory. I would never be enough." Raphael shook his head. "You are not competing, Marion. Helen was the love of my youth and will always have a place in my heart. But she is gone, and I stayed. And for 5 years I only existed, didn't live. Until you arrived and showed me it is possible to feel again, that it is possible to love again, different but no less real." Tears ran free down Marion's face now. "I am afraid," she confessed, "afraid to believe this is real and then find out it isn't. Afraid that you realize I'm really too weak, too delicate. Afraid to lose you." Raphael wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs. A gesture of tenderness so deep, Marion almost crumbled. "You are not weak," he repeated. "You are the strongest person I know. Strong enough to be delicate in a world that demands hardness, strong enough to bring beauty where there was only sadness, strong enough to make me want to live again." They stood there, so close they breathed the same air, the moment suspended between what was and what could be. It was Marion who closed the final distance, rising on tiptoes, touching his lips with hers in a kiss so soft and so charged with emotion that it seemed the world had stopped. Raphael pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, and Marion felt as if she were finally home, as if all the years of rejection, all the voices saying she wouldn't do, had been just a tortuous path leading her exactly here, to this man, to this moment. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. Raphael rested his forehead on hers. "I don't know how we are going to make this work," he admitted, "but I know I want to try. If you want to." Marion nodded, incapable of speaking. She wanted to. She wanted it more than anything she had ever wanted in life. But knowing they wanted it didn't make the path easier. In the following weeks, as rumors about their relationship began to spread through the town of Cedar Creek, Marion faced the judgment she had feared. Women who before greeted her politely now ignored her. Men made comments when she passed. Opportunist, fortune hunter, a woman who has no shame in taking advantage of a widower's pain. Marion heard it all, and every word was like a small cut bleeding inside. She continued working, continued caring for the house, but carried a growing weight of guilt and inadequacy. When she visited her mother on Sundays, Mrs. Evelyn saw the suffering on her daughter's face. "What is happening, Marion?" she asked one Sunday. Marion told everything, words coming out in a torrent of relief for finally sharing. Told about Raphael, about the feelings, about Philip, about the cruel rumors. Her mother listened to everything in silence, and when Marion finished, Mrs. Evelyn held her daughter's hands. "My daughter, do you love this man?" she asked directly. Marion nodded, a new wave of tears coming. "I do, Mother. I know I shouldn't, that it is complicated, that it will bring trouble. But I do." Mrs. Evelyn smiled with sadness. "Then you already have your answer. True love isn't easy, Marion, never was. You will have to decide if it is worth fighting, if he is worth fighting for, if you are worth fighting for him." Marion wiped her tears. "I don't know if I am strong enough for this fight, Mother." Her mother squeezed her hands. "You are stronger than you think. Always were. You just never had enough reason to show that strength. Maybe now you do. It was a week after that conversation that everything reached a climax. Marion was on the second floor cleaning the hallway when she noticed something strange. The door to Helen's room, always locked, was ajar. She stood paralyzed, looking at that dark crack. She knew she shouldn't enter, that Raphael had been clear about that room being forbidden territory. But curiosity was too strong, mixed with the need to understand, to know the woman who had been loved so deeply. Marion pushed the door slowly. It opened with a slight creak, and the smell that came out was of a place closed for a long time, a mix of mold, old perfume, and sadness. The room was large and had clearly been luxurious. Canopy bed with lace curtains now yellowed, high dresser with fogged mirror, carved wooden trunk, vanity covered in perfume bottles and jewelry, clothes still hanging in the open wardrobe. It was as if Helen had left for a moment and would return at any instant. Marion entered hesitant, almost expecting to be reprimanded by a ghost. She went to the vanity and picked up a hairbrush. There were dark strands trapped between the bristles, strands that had belonged to Helen 5 years ago and were still there, frozen in time. Marion looked in the fogged mirror and saw her own distorted reflection. How could she ever fill the void left by a woman who had been so loved that her widower locked the room and never returned? If you are enjoying this emotional story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It was then that Marion saw something that made her freeze. On the floor, between the bed and the trunk, there were dark stains. The same stains she had seen in the hallway, but here they were larger, deeper. They looked like old blood that had penetrated so deep into the wood it had become a permanent part. Marion felt sudden nausea. Helen had died here, Raphael had said. But was it just illness? Why would there be so much blood? And why those stains in the hallway, as if something had been dragged? Marion was so absorbed in her disturbing thoughts that she didn't hear footsteps on the stairs, didn't realize she wasn't alone, until a voice behind her made her jump in fright. Found something interesting. Philip was at the door with a triumphant expression. He saw Marion inside the forbidden room and practically salivated with opportunity. Raphael will love to know that his precious housekeeper doesn't respect boundaries, that she invades places that were explicitly marked as forbidden. Marion left the room quickly. The door was open, she tried to explain. I didn't force anything. Philip gave a cruel laugh. And you think that matters? You entered where you shouldn't, violated his trust. When he knows, he will send you away. Finally, he will see you aren't as perfect as you pretend to be. Marion felt panic rising. Please don't tell him. I was just curious. I didn't touch anything. I didn't ruin anything. Philip approached with a predatory look. I might not tell, he said slowly. If you leave here voluntarily, if you take your things and go away today, leave Raphael in peace. He needs a woman of his class, not an opportunist housekeeper who sticks her nose where she shouldn't. Marion felt anger mixed with fear. I am not an opportunist, and I love him. Philip spat the word love. You don't know what love is. You only know how to recognize an opportunity when you see one. Marion was going to answer when she heard a voice coming from the stairs. Philip, what are you doing here? Raphael climbed the last steps and stopped upon seeing the scene. Philip near Marion, door to Helen's room open, expression of guilt on her face. His expression closed. What is happening? Philip hurried to answer before Marion could speak. I arrived and found your housekeeper coming out of Helen's room. The room you keep locked. Seems she doesn't respect your rules much, cousin. Raphael looked at Marion, and she saw pain in his eyes, felt it like a physical betrayal. Mr. Raphael, began Marion with a desperate voice. The door was open. I didn't force it. I just entered for a moment. Sorry, I shouldn't have entered. Please, let me explain. Raphael raised his hand, asking for silence. His voice when he spoke was too controlled, a sign of contained emotion. "Marian, can you give us a moment? Philip and I need to talk." Marian hesitated, tears already flowing. "Mr. Raphael, please." He didn't look at her. "A moment, Marian. Please." Marian descended the stairs with trembling legs and ran to her room, closed the door and crumbled onto the bed, sobbing. She had ruined everything, had violated the only absolute rule he had established. And worse, Philip had seen. Philip, who wanted to destroy her. Philip, who now had perfect ammunition. She heard raised voices coming from upstairs, but couldn't distinguish words. Only knew she was lost, that she was going to be sent away, that she was going to lose Raphael before even truly having him. Half an hour later, a firm knock on the door made her sit up, startled. "Marian!" It was Raphael's voice. "May I come in?" She wiped her face quickly, though she knew it was obvious she had cried. "Come in," she said with a hoarse voice. Raphael entered and closed the door behind him. He looked tired, aged 10 years in that last hour. He sat in the chair near the bed and stayed in silence for a moment too long. "Philip is gone," he said finally. "I made it clear he is no longer welcome here, that I don't want to see him unless absolutely necessary for business, and even then he will be treated as a stranger." Marian nodded, not knowing what to say. Raphael continued. "He told me you were in Helen's room, that you violated the only space I asked to be respected. Is it true?" Marian couldn't lie. "It is true," she whispered. "The door was open. I know it doesn't justify it. I know I shouldn't have entered. But I entered, and I am so sorry." Raphael breathed deep. "The door was open because I had opened it," he explained. "For the first time in 5 years, I entered that room this morning. Forced myself to enter, to look, to start the process of letting go. Forgot to lock when I left because I was emotionally exhausted. So technically you didn't force entry, but you entered knowing it was a forbidden place." Marian shrank back. "I know. It was wrong. If you want me to leave, I understand. I will get my things." "No," said Raphael immediately. "I don't want you to leave. I want you to explain why. Why risk everything entering there?" Marian struggled to find words. "Because I needed to understand," she said finally. "Needed to know her, even through objects and space. Because I love you, and she loved you. And I needed to know how to compete with a ghost. How to be enough when I know I will never be her." Raphael stood looking at Marian for a long moment. Then he stood up and extended his hand. "Come with me. There is something I need to show you. Something I should have shown before." Marian took his hand, hesitant, and followed him back to the second floor. Raphael took her to Helen's room, now with the door totally open, afternoon sunlight entering through the windows he must have opened. He pointed to the stains on the floor. "Did you see this?" Marian nodded. Raphael knelt beside the dark stains. "Helen didn't die of fever," he said with a voice loaded with ancient pain. "She died bleeding. The doctor said it was an internal problem they couldn't fix. Something with the womb, with bleeding that wouldn't stop. She suffered here for 3 weeks, bleeding, weakening, until there was nothing more they could do. I held her hand and felt completely helpless. Couldn't save her. Couldn't even alleviate the pain. Only could watch her slip through my fingers." Marian knelt beside him, tears running. "Mr. Raphael, I am so sorry. I can't imagine that pain." Raphael looked at her. "I locked this room because I couldn't enter here without feeling that helplessness again, without seeing her suffering. But this morning I forced myself to enter. Do you know why? Because of you. Because I realized I was living half a life, trapped between the past and fear of the future. And you showed me it is possible to honor the past without staying trapped in it. That it is possible to love again without betraying the memory of who we loved before." He took Marian's hands between his. "You are not competing with Helen. Never were. She was first love, youth's love. You are second chance, maturity's love, different but no less precious. Do you understand?" Marian nodded, barely able to see through the tears. "I understand. And Mr. Raphael, I will never try to replace her. I only want to make my own space in your heart, if you let me." Raphael smiled for the first time since all the drama. "You already have your space, Marian. A big space. The question is, do you want to stay, even knowing it will be difficult, that people like Philip will try to separate us, that society will judge?" Marian thought of all the times she had been rejected, all the times they said she was inadequate, thought of her mother saying true love is worth fighting for, thought of this man in front of her who saw her, who valued her, who loved her for exactly who she was. "I want to stay," she said with a firm voice for the first time. "I want to fight, for you, for us, no matter what comes." Raphael pulled her into a tight hug, and they stayed there, kneeling in the room that had held so much pain, starting the process of transforming it into a symbol of healing and new beginnings. In the following months, Raphael and Marian faced together the adversities they knew would come. Rumors in town only increased when Raphael began courting her openly, taking her to dinners, introducing her as someone important in his life, not just a housekeeper. Some people judged them cruelly, but others, principally the older ones who had seen Raphael's suffering in the last 5 years, supported the relationship. Seeing him smile again, seeing him alive again, was evidence enough that Marian was a blessing, not a curse. Philip tried to cause more trouble, spreading rumors increasingly malicious, went as far as suggesting Marian had bewitched Raphael, that she had used obscure arts. But the accusations were so ridiculous they ended up backfiring on him. People began to see Philip for what he was, a bitter and ambitious man willing to destroy his cousin's happiness for his own benefit. When Raphael finally cut all commercial ties with him, few in the community were surprised or disappointed. The decisive moment came 6 months later, on a hot February afternoon. Raphael had gone to town to resolve business and returned with a serious expression. Asked Marian to meet him in the garden, which was now restored to its former glory thanks to her efforts. The rose bushes were blooming, the fountain was working again, stone paths clean and defined. It was a sanctuary of beauty and peace. Marian found him near the fountain, nervous at his expression. "Raphael, what happened?" she asked, worried. He took her hands. "Marian, I went to town today with a specific purpose," he said. "I went to speak with the preacher, with the notary, with the important people. I went to announce my intentions." Marian felt her heart race. What intentions? Raphael knelt before her right there, among the roses she had tended with so much love. "Marian Rose, you brought life back to this ranch, brought life back to me. Showed me that delicacy is not weakness, but a special strength. Taught me to love again. Do you want to marry me? Do you want to be my wife? Do you want to transform this house into our true home?" Marian couldn't answer immediately because she was crying too hard, but finally managed to nod and say yes, 1,000 times yes. Raphael stood up and kissed her there in the garden, under the afternoon sun, surrounded by the perfume of roses. And in that moment, Marian understood that all past pain, all rejection, every voice that said she wouldn't do, had been just preparation for this moment, for this love, for this life. The wedding happened 3 months later, in May of 1929, a simple but beautiful ceremony in the estate chapel. Mrs. Evelyn cried with happiness, seeing her daughter in a wedding dress she herself had embroidered. Mrs. Higgins prepared a memorable feast. The ranch hands celebrated genuinely. And Marian, the woman who had been considered too delicate to be a wife, became Mrs. Montgomery, mistress of Willow Creek Manor. The following years brought happiness both had thought impossible. Marian not only cared for the house, but transformed it into a welcoming home known throughout the region for its beauty and hospitality. She convinced Raphael to transform Helen's room into a sewing room and library, honoring the memory but giving new purpose to the space. Together they restored every corner of the property. Raphael blossomed under her care and love, becoming not just a successful rancher, but a complete man again. Marian never lost her delicacy, her sensitive nature. But she discovered that married to a man who valued those qualities, they became strengths. Her sensitivity made her excellent at dealing with people, at resolving conflicts between employees, at creating an environment where everyone felt valued. Her delicacy in decoration and organization made the ranch a destination sought by visitors. Her skills with sewing and embroidery created a small business that employed women from the town. She proved that delicacy, when supported and valued, can change worlds. 5 years after the wedding, on a clear spring morning, Marian was in the garden picking roses when Raphael came to find her. He hugged her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Marian turned in his arms, smiling. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered. "Who would have said that the girl no one wanted for being too delicate would find a man who loves her exactly for that?" Raphael kissed her softly. "I am the lucky one here. I found the person who taught me that strength comes in many forms, that delicacy can heal where hardness fails. That true love doesn't demand we change who we are, but that we be exactly who we are." They stood there embraced, surrounded by the roses Marian had planted, by the beauty she had created, by the love they built together. And Marian thought of all the girls like her, all the people considered too delicate, too sensitive, too inadequate, thought of how the world judged them wrongly. Because in the end, it wasn't about changing to fit others' expectations. It was about finding who saw value exactly where you were. It was about finding love that didn't demand you be less delicate, but that celebrated your delicacy as a rare gift. Years later, when Marian's hair began to show silver strands, and Raphael had more wrinkles around his eyes from smiling so much, they still walked through the garden holding hands at dusk. Willow Creek Manor had become more than a prosperous property. It had become a symbol of second chances, of love that heals, of beauty that persists even after deep loss. And Marian, the woman who once believed she would never be desired, became a legend in the region. The delicate woman who transformed a dead ranch into a sanctuary of life. The woman who proved that sometimes what the world calls weakness is exactly the strength someone needs to return to life. And when young people from town came to ask for advice about love, about life, Marian always said the same thing. Never change who you are to be accepted. The right person will love you not despite your delicate qualities, but because of them. True love doesn't demand you be strong the way the world defines strength. It demands only that you be true to yourself, and that truth, that authenticity, is the most powerful strength that exists. Raphael always added, holding his wife's hand, "And when you find that love, fight for it, because it is worth every difficulty, every judgment, every obstacle, the love that allows us to be exactly who we are. That is the love that transforms lives." The sun set over Willow Creek Manor that golden afternoon, illuminating the main house that had returned to breathing, the garden that had bloomed again, the couple who had found one another when both needed it most. And the roses, always the roses, perfumed the air with the promise that beauty persists, that delicacy has its own power, that true love always finds a way. Marian had found not just a husband, not just a home, but validation that she had always been enough, that her delicacy was never a defect to be corrected, but a quality to be celebrated. And that, in the end, was the life of dreams she never knew she could desire. A life where being exactly who you are is not only accepted, but deeply loved and valued.